I guess to an extent with this, it's I guess not necessarily taking off your historian hat and putting on your Christian hat, but at least wearing both hats at the same time. And when we look at statues and this idea of memorializing people and venerating people for future generations and posterity, is that a practice that I guess Christians should endorse, seeing that the same it seems like nearly everybody has something at least that you could find objectionable. So should we even be tempted to memorialize anybody at all, considering, who knows, in 20 years time, even some of the key people in Christian ministry have fallen recently, some after their death. So to me, it makes me think, should we even go down the road of memorializing people, or do you think we should remember people for great achievements regardless of flaws in personal character, considering that none of us is without flaw?
Hmm. Great question. I have a talk that I have presented on a number of occasions entitled A Plea for Patrimony. And in that, I start with the story of the monument to the forefathers. It was one of those accounts that I just stumbled upon in my readings. And we were preparing to do a historical vacation one year. And I asked my wife to call ahead, talk to the Chamber of Commerce, and find out a little bit more about this statue that's right there at Plymouth Plantation area in Plymouth, Massachusetts. So she called, and to no avail. She could not find anyone who knew about this statue. I'd read about it in the book, so I knew it was there. And so we made our way up to that area, and we were right down there at the Mayflower 2, as it was called back in the day. They've since changed some of the things. And there's Plymouth Rock and all that. And I asked one of the locals, I said, hey, what do you know about this statue, this monument to the forefathers? And the guy said, oh, it's just right over there. He pointed off in the direction about half a mile or so. And we drove that way, and soon we found it. And when we arrived, it was midday. I remember that when we were at Plymouth Plantation, the place was overrun with sixth graders from the James Carter Elementary School. I happened to teach about James Carter. He was the guy that basically introduced the whole progressive movement. He was one that wrote the bill that Horace Mann ended up endorsing, right? And most people don't know this is James G. Carter, not James Earl Carter. At any rate, as a little aside, the Brewster House there, Plymouth Plantation, had a big old Geneva Bible. The guy impersonating William Brewster said, now, where would I turn in the Bible to find the Ten Commandments? And these sixth graders had blank looks on their face. No one knew. Then he got to Exodus chapter 20, and he turned the Bible and asked one of the fellows standing nearby to read. Now, granted, Geneva Bible is not the easiest to read, but this poor little fellow stumbled, hemmed and hawed, and just really struggled. Our oldest at that time was maybe in second grade. My sense, biased as it is that he could have read circles around that guy. Homeschooled, just taught a phonetic approach and all. So that was just a little microcosm, a little picture of how well education is working to dumb us down. Having said that, when we got to this monument, the only other person that we saw was a guy apparently on lunch break taking a nap. Not a solitary soul around. It's this beautiful 81-foot high marble statue, granite statue, I guess it is, and it's entitled Faith. And Faith has her right hand pointing upward. In her left hand, she's holding the Bible. And all around the base are these other statuary, education, morality, and liberty. And wow, people ask me, well, what does our nation need to do to correct this course that we're on? Get back to the monument is what I say. Get back to the monument, because if we do reinstitute morality in this country, if we get education back on biblical bases, if we introduce the true meaning of liberty and law, then we will have solved 90% of our problems. Having said that, the Pilgrims were not perfect people. They had their flaws, their shortcomings, but that monument is a reminder. When I was there last, I was preparing to do a historical monodrama telling that story in the first person. And I learned that a group of vandals had just recently spray painted that monument. That was the big thing here a couple, 3 years ago. Fortunately, there was a local pressure washing company that Gratis came in and cleaned it all up. And when we got there to shoot our footage, it was in good shape. Um, that monument tells a story. If that monument is taken away, the next generation is not going to be able to ask, well, why is that there? And there's a biblical basis, as I alluded to earlier. Go back and read the account there in Deuteronomy. It's a couple of different places, actually, where they're told to put these, this presentation I give is monuments and memorials. The importance of the Bible is clear when it says, do not remove the ancient landmark. Do not shift those things away. If we do, we lose our footing. I do not agree with much of what Woodrow Wilson said, but he observed quite aptly that a people that are basically have no sense of where they've come from do not know where they're going. Karl Marx said it even more succinctly when he said, a people deprived of their heritage are easily persuaded. That, Josh, is the heart of that.
So even with figures from the past that, obviously we're not perfect people, it's I guess the values that they represent and the things that they sort of strive towards in their lives, that's what is worth remembering more so than the character of the person themselves in some cases.
We, as I said earlier, we all have feet of clay, and that's not reason to memorialize. We're not worshiping these people. I want to put that marker down too. You were telling the story about Muhammad. It's interesting that when Muhammad grew up in Mecca, that city was custodian to some 350 different gods. And he goes out and he has this so-called revelation, and he accurately observed that they were idolatrous. They were worshiping idols. And so he threw out all 350 except the moon god. And he made the moon god Allah. Every mosque that you'll see, I've been to Ghana 9 times, every mosque I drive by has a crescent moon on the top. That's a symbol of the moon god, Allah. That's the one god he kept, okay? And whenever the Muslims came into Alexandria, they destroyed the library. They had no sense. If it did not align with their view, it must go. Fast forward to Stalin's era, when he told Lysenko, you're my man, and Lysenko claimed that he could make citrus grow in the tundra. And how many millions because Mao Zedong bought into the same notion, how many millions of people starved? Arguably, more people died at the hand of Lysenko, a name that most people don't even know, than by any other scientist. And yet, even though he was a bogus scientist, he was a false scientist, because Stalin gave his stamp of approval, that became the official narrative. And the real scientists were executed. That's what's happened with history. The real history is being sidelined, and now we're going to raise up these folks that are not just inconsequential, but they're actually counterproductive to the very mores upon which this nation was founded. I ask my students this: why is the crossing of the Delaware River by George Washington more important than the crossing of the Delaware River by George Smith in 1910? There probably was a guy named George Smith who crossed the Delaware in 1910. I don't know that, but I'm just surmising. See, the fact is, some historical events, you can't record everything. There are some who just want to just write everything down. It's all history. But you have to run things through a filter. What are the most germane points? The Bible indicates that if the whole were written down, it would fill volume after volume after volume. And yet the Bible it's that synthesis of what God inspired, what we need to know. And in a sense, I'm not raising history to that same level, but history is how God works with mankind. And so I am all for monuments that are going to accurately depict. Now, let me say this as a counterpoint. Years ago in New Hampshire, there was a bill introduced to have a bronze statue cast of the Lincoln Brigade that had gone over to help in the Spanish Civil War. Well, there's a lot of misinformation and confusion about what was going on in that Spanish Civil War. Franco, his nationalist army was fighting against the Soviet Russians. They were actually inserting their soldiers into Spain. They brought concentration camps. the so-called Republicans, and see the Lincoln Brigade joined the communists. They were fighting for the wrong side. So this legislative bill was in place. A constituent called his representative and said, "Do you know the story of what really happened in the Spanish Civil War?" And he related in more detail what I just briefly outlined here. And this representative essentially said, "I'd never heard this before." He went into the well of the House and he gave an impassioned plea not to cast a bronze statue of the clenched fist. There's your communist symbol, because that would you're honoring that which is anti-scriptural. You're honoring and putting on a pedestal that which is that would be like making a statue of Lucifer. We don't want to honor him. We don't need statues of Lucifer. We need reminders of those who did attempt to walk what was a biblical path. Yes, they stumbled. Maybe they had their shortcomings, but and I did say earlier that even some of those statuary of folks that we would not be able to endorse are reminders of events that took place. I had a chance to visit the Holocaust Museum in Jerusalem. It's a very sobering experience. I would not propose that we do away with it because that's a distasteful portion of history. No, we've got to remember. There's a plaque in a Australian restaurant that reads, "Lest we forget." We've got to rehearse these storylines. We've got to, in this case, we're kind of focused on monuments a bit, have these reminders of what has transpired so that we see God's providence at work and we see, man's reaction to God. That's what the story of history is. It's basically a story of what man has done with the time God has providentially given. And I think monuments can go a long way in helping to propel that storyline.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that leads pretty much exactly where I was looking to go, and I was going to, if you'll humor me, I'll play devil's advocate for a second.
Okay.
So I guess there's a differentiation you can make between erecting new statues and looking at those that have already been there from the past. So if we think of as a couple of examples, imagery around statues, one of the first things that comes to mind is the Iraqi people pulling down Saddam's statue, or even the process of denazification in Germany. So those were processes where I guess there was a corporate, I guess a show that they were turning away from particular, I'm not going to say values because I don't think most people share the values of their leaders in those regards, but I guess turning away from points in their history that they were not proud of. So would you say that would be an appropriate response to statues that represent things that en masse society cannot stand by? Is it appropriate in some circumstances to evaluate things and say, well, we can agree, and I guess for us, the Bible is our criteria for evaluating that. But for society as a whole, can we turn away from things and make a symbolic gesture that we are no longer aligned with those views?
Which came first, the chicken or the egg? So you have to back this up and ask, what was the context in which these kinds of monuments were erected in the first place? And if folks were misinformed or they were under the spell of some evil personality and all, for example, Hugo Chavez, for example, obviously he took a country that once was prosperous and put it into a nosedive and so on. To have a statue of him made in the first place is giving honor to one to whom honor is not due. Uh, you could say the same thing about any number of others. I was sitting at lunch one time, just rehearsing a quick story, and the person sitting across from me was a graduate student, and he was wearing a Che Guevara button. And I asked, "Why are you wearing a Che Guevara button?" "Well, I don't know." I said, "Do you know who Che Guevara was?" And he didn't bargain for this, but for the rest of the lunch hour, he heard a mini lecture of Che Guevara, who signed his letters Lenin to Lenin the second. And he asked, "How many did we kill today?" There was one instance where Che Guevara was in his office. A mother came in begging for her son's life. He picked up the phone and called for the execution of her son while she was in his office. Why would you want to wear a lapel button of that man? Well, see, most folks, and I Could show you slides of pictures there where when Obama was running for president in a Texas office, one of his campaign offices, there's a big Che Guevara flag in the background. Well, that tells you volumes about the people who are supporting that. Now, I am not proposing that we burn every flag of Che Guevara. I think we should keep those as a reminder of what was amiss, what went amiss. And so I'm very reticent to just start pulling down statues and destroying. I think rather we need to tell the true story of what occurred with Saddam Hussein. We need to tell the real story of what happened in Nazi Germany and let those be reminders.